Okay. So we're giving everyone time. We'll get going. As a quick introduction, so my name is Matt. I am a strategic customer success manager here at Mixpanel. So I look after some of our largest accounts across Europe and the Middle East. I've been at Mixpanel for a while now, working with customers across everything from their implementation to adoption, engagement, and everything kind of in between that, analytics strategy as well. And what we're going to be going through today is the Mixpanel Implementation 101 webinar. So a bit of content to cover, always some time for some Q&A at the end. Just a bit of housekeeping to start. It's already been asked in the chat, but for those of you who didn't see it or joined after that, the webinar is being recorded. We're recording everything, and you will get a link to it in the next day or so to keep. We have had some pre-submitted questions, which has been great. So thank you for everyone who did that. And if you've joined and you have your pre-submitted questions, that's great. I will be answering as many of those as I can as we go through. So there'll be linking to a few of the sections that I am using. But also we have a Slido. So a Slido is a great way to submit your questions. So please do, if you want to submit your questions through there. Again, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end, so you can do that. But also, if you need to, then please just raise your hand and we can unmute you, and then you can ask your question live during the session. So plenty of ways for you to get your questions. If you have any technical difficulties, then just let us know. You can connect via phone, but it shouldn't be an issue. And everything that you see today, so all of the links, apart from a couple, but I'll go through them when we get to, but all of the links, all of the resources, all of the articles will be sent to you as well. Everything will be shared, so you will have access to absolutely everything. So please do not worry about that. Okay, let's get started. So the first thing is, when we think about our implementation, it kind of boils down, and this is what I think, and this is how I discuss it with our customers, is to 4 big questions. So the first one is, what should I track? Probably the biggest question, but you need to know what you should be tracking as part of your implementation. So how you should be planning it, what you should be tracking, what you should be looking to do. But then the question is, well, what if I'm already implemented and I'm already tracking data? But that's great. And that's exactly what we hope you're doing. And then whether that's from an external data source, whether you're using Mixpanel already, whether you're not, wherever that might be. But what we want to show you as well is how you can tidy up what you've already got, kind of cover a few of those things. And we'll be doing that too. Then what about if you have other sources of data? Well, we want to bring those in too. We want to talk about how you can use external sources. Mixpanel isn't the only source of data that you should have. We want to talk about that. And also using your data, so making the most of everything that you're collecting. So once you're tracking, once you've planned everything, once you've gone through, how can you make the best use of that data? So I'm going to be going through a little bit of that. All of that we'll probably try and get through in about half an hour, 35 minutes. And then, as I said, time for questions at the end. As already mentioned, please submit your questions via Slido if you have them. Elena has shared the link there. You can go in and you can submit them through there. And also, you can also open that page and upvote the questions. So if somebody's already asked the question that you'd like an answer to, you can go in and upvote that, and it goes towards the top of the list, and I'll answer those first. Okay, let's get going. First question, what should I track? Big question, lots of answers. So the first thing is that Mixpanel, we recommend creating a tracking plan that presents business goals and your analytics questions while setting up Mixpanel. So this is a big thing. We recommend planning everything in advance. There are data tools that you can switch on and they collect absolutely everything, and that's absolutely fine. But with Mixpanel, we always recommend a little bit of planning ahead of time to think to myself, well, why am I tracking these things? What do I want to do with them? And how am I going to use that data afterwards? Your tracking plan should outline events, event properties, super properties, and user profile properties. And you need them to align to your implementation, but you also want to align them with your KPIs and business goals. So that's the most important thing. Now, what we have links to, and these links will be shared, are help articles to explain exactly what event properties, super properties, user properties are. Mixpanel also collects default properties, so a lot of information about the device. Some of the UTM and attribution information is collected by default. And what we also have, and these are on the right-hand side, is links to sample tracking plans. So these are going to be incredibly important, because not only do we want you to collect these, but actually we have sample plans that are shared as Google documents. And you can take a look at what we recommend, and they outline a few of those things. You can take that, you can expand on it, and we actually give you a blank tracking plan as well to go through all of those things. But even knowing this, the temptation is to still track everything, and that, I would say isn't a terrible idea. If you don't know, then probably look to track everything. But the key is, before you start planning and before you start your implementation, is to identify your focus metric or your key KPI. We call it a focus metric. You may call it a North Star metric, or whatever it might be, your key KPI, your single source of truth, whatever, your one metric that matters. We've heard all of those. And then build out and track the events you need to measure, monitor, and improve that metric. So that's a really big point as well. We're going to go through that in a second. But first, just like explaining what events, properties, and user profiles are. Now, again, if you've already implemented Mixpanel, you probably have a good idea of what these are. But events, event properties, and user properties are different, and it's important to know why you need to track them and why you need to track all of them if you want to. So events are actions that your users are doing in your app, on your website, within your product. So things like sending a message. If you're in a message, sending a message. If you're video sharing, it's consuming content. If you are banking, it's making a transaction, whatever it might be. That's a big thing there. And then you have event properties. Now these describe your events. So not only are you just got people clicked on a button in my app, but what did that button mean, or where was that person, or who are they, or what is their account type, or everything to do with that. And then the user profile properties are built up about that user. So that's incredibly important as well, because the properties build up a continually evolving picture of your users. So not only did they do their events and did you collect the properties about them, but the profiles are constantly being updated and they reflect the most up-to-date information about your user. And to show that in more detail, if you're collecting a stream of events, so the app has been opened and then you're sending a message and then sending an image and then you view a group and then you send a video, the properties are being collected against all of those events. Now, this doesn't have to be the same properties against every event, because maybe the same properties aren't relevant for every single event. If somebody is sending an image in your app, then you maybe want to know information about that image. Where did it come from? What was the size of that image? But for the same reason, you don't want to collect those properties about opening the app, because simply they're not relevant. So you don't need to do that every single time. And again, these are just examples, but they would constantly be built up about your user. So a great example is I always used is what seems like a lifetime ago when we were able to travel and visit customers, which I do a lot. If I was opening, say, let's say Netflix on my phone to consume content, I did that in London where I was based. And then what would happen in there is my events would say that I was in London. But say then I traveled to Berlin or to Paris or Barcelona. Let's say I traveled to Barcelona. I open my app again and the app would say, you are in Barcelona. But the events from the day before would still say I'm in London, because that's where I was before. So my profile would be updated, the most up-to-date information, but the previous events would still be there. And that's really valuable, because it means that you're going to be able to do things like, how are people moving from free to paid accounts? How are they moving from one part of the app to the other? How are they moving through as their profile is changing within my app? So that's an important thing that you can do there. Now, the question there, yeah, so Slido, thank you, Elena. A better way to take a look at this is, obviously this is just an example, but what you can see here is if we come out of my presentation and we go into here, is I'm in live view within your project, and you'll have this too. So under data management, you then have live view, and you can see events coming in, and you can see these events being added in, and then you can see the properties attached to them. So this is why they're important, because the events are coming in, the properties are assigned to them. And if you want to test the events and properties coming in, what you can do is, if you identify kind of yourself while you're testing your app, you will have a distinct ID assigned to yourself. Now, Mixpanel assigns a distinct ID to every user until we know who they are, but you can change this when you alias your users to be anything you want. So it could be their email address, it could be their phone number if you're collecting it, it could be your membership ID, your account ID, whatever it might be. So that's what we have here. Some of these are account IDs. You can search for them in this box, and then it will show you all of the events that that user is doing in real time, and you can see that information. So that's why this is going to be really valuable, because you can effectively live QA the data that's coming in. And even beyond that, when we go into a user profile, so when we go into users, we then see a user profile, and we can see again the feed of events that are coming in, the properties that are assigned to this event, things like the distinct ID. And that's why it's really important, because we can see not only is this information coming in, so we can see things like the campaign source, the device that people are using, everything to do with that. But then we have the profile being built up on the left-hand side. So we see, okay, where is this person? What experiment group are they in? What were they doing? You know, we have incremental properties, so things like the number of transactions that they've done over time. And this is really important and really valuable for the data that you're collecting and the analysis that you can do. So we would recommend collecting as many of these as possible, collecting events that you want to track based on the KPIs, but also thinking about, well, actually, what are the properties I need to attach to these? Because it's not just about button clicks or viewing a page or sending a message. It's actually, well, what are the properties assigned to that, and what's the information to do with that? So that's important to remember as well. And all of this information is still being stored, and all this information is being collected within Mixpanel. Back to our presentation. Now, this is where we go into the sample spec document. So I've linked these here. The tracking plan will be a map for implementing Mixpanel and ensuring that everything you need is being collected. Now, it's split out so that it says what are the events that you want to track, what are the properties that you want to track, and it also has a column to say what KPI or metric is this relevant to. So actually what you can do is plan and say, this is what I want to track because these are the metrics I want to track and these are the events that I need to get there. And actually what you'll find is a really good thing is you'll find that you maybe need to track more than you thought, but actually you maybe need to track a lot less than you thought, because you may think I want to track every single time somebody views a page, clicks on a button or whatever. But then when you think, well, is it tied to a KPI? Is it tied to a metric? And if it's not, then do I need to track it? And that's a big thing, because if it, depending on the plan you're on in Mixpanel, it may be that you have lots of events filling up your event bucket and filling up your tracked user bucket because you're just collecting everything. But you may find that you don't need that. So it's a really good thing to do, a really good exercise to do, to go through and think, you know, do I need these? Is it something that is really important to me or not? And how can I go through that? So as I said, all of these are linked. There are sample ones here for the kind of the big areas that we work with. And there's also a blank tracking plan that opens in a Google Doc that you can save and edit yourself and just create something new. And this doesn't have to be the way you do it. You can move everything around and do something different, but it's just what we use. So if you were to buy an implementation package with Mixpanel when you onboarded with us, this is what we would use and this is what we would share with you. So we obviously want you to have access to this as well, even if you're not part of that paid group. That's absolutely fine. So now that we understand how we can track, we need to understand what we want to track. And this is a big thing, and it's called finding your focus metric. Now, this is a bit of a larger thought piece, and we do work with people to understand this, but really what you want to think about is what you're trying to achieve with your app, what you're trying to achieve with your product, what you're trying to achieve as a company. And we work with plenty of people that I would say have a loose understanding of this, but really what you want to say is, what is your strategy as a company? What is your strategy with your product? And then what KPIs and metrics do you need to track to achieve that strategy? And then what events do you need under that? Now, the strategy that you have and the strategy that you set will drive the implementation, because that will determine your KPIs. You know, if your strategy is to become the biggest content sharing app, you know, in your region, then what KPIs do you need for that? Well, you need to measure engagement. You need to measure how many people are consuming content over a certain amount of time. And then what metrics do you need to that? Well, we need to have weekly engaged users. We need to have new users when they've onboarded to see, you know, are they doing the content that we assume? And then what events do we need for that? Well, we need to track what people are watching. What do they do once they onboard and things like that. And then on the other side of that, once you have your implementation, it also underpins your strategy, because the events that you're tracking also determines the metrics that you can track, the KPIs that you're measuring, and therefore which direction the strategy is moving in. Now, what we recommend, and this is what we have, and I've linked the article to here, is we have what's called the Mixpanel measurement framework, which is where we have the focus metric at the top. And we recommend this being a usage metric, because obviously we're not naive. Everyone's metric is ultimately revenue. That's what you want. That's absolutely fine. But your focus metric should be based on something like usage, which means instead of it being simply, you know, we want to raise loads of money. It should be, well, actually what creates that? And that's things like active usage. It's things like people consuming our product daily, weekly, monthly, depending on what the type of product is and depending on whether it's something that people will be using every day or every week or every month. And then we have level 1 metrics underneath. So reach is new users that you're onboarding, and then are you activating them? Are your users engaged? Are you retaining your users? And then any sort of business specific metrics, so anything that you decide that you want to track that kind of doesn't fit into those. And then there are sub metrics underneath that. And the reason why this is important, and this is what we recommend, is because we know, working with the number of customers and companies we work with, that it's impossible for everybody to sit and stare at one metric every day and think, well, how am I going to improve that? But actually what you can do is, if you break it down into individual teams and individual groups, you can say, so what I can do is I can improve the experience for new users joining my app today. And that would be a level 2 metric. And then that feeds into your level 1 metric, which then feeds into your focus metric. So actually what you can do is you can say to people, this is what we want to do for that. And this is the metric that we want to track as part of the team. And then it goes up to the level 1 metric, and then it goes up to the focus metric as well. Now there's a link that goes to our kind of guide that we created called the Guide to Product Metrics. If you haven't seen it, it's worth a good read. I would also say that it's not something that you don't have to use this framework. It's just that we recommend building a framework of some sort. So you understand what you're tracking, you understand what you want to cover, you understand, all of the information that you want to get in. And then you think to yourself, okay, so what events do I need to track because of that? What do I need to know about my users to understand what is valuable for my product? It's a big question, but it's an important thing as well. Moving on from that, we're now into what have I already implemented. So probably a question for a lot of you would be, I've already got data, I've already got some sort of thing. Now, first thing I would say is that basically what we've already talked about, you can still do. Because if you've already implemented, we would still recommend going back and looking at a framework and a spec document and thinking to myself, okay, I already have all of this data. What can I do within that? What can I take a look at? What can I do? But also in Mixpanel, you have a number of tools to manage your data. So you don't need to, think to yourself, oh, I have to start again. There are lots of things that you can do within your Mixpanel implementation. So if we go back into here and then back into my demo project, if I go into Lexicon, which all of you will have access to, there are a number of things in here that we can do to manage my implementation. The first is that everything that you're collecting, you can change the name of. So everything you can see here that this event is called campaign_delivery, but I've changed it to message sent. I've changed to experiment started. Obviously for demo reasons, we've changed these to lots of different things. You can do all of that. So you don't have to go back in and change the name of the event in your implementation in order to get it changed. We can do that in here, and it just cleans up your implementation. Along with other things, you can select different events and you can hide them. And what hide does is it still means that you're collecting those events, but it just takes them away from all of the drop downs in your reporting. So it just cleans things up. Now, I don't have access to another feature in here, but what you can do if you are a project owner is you can drop events. And drop events is more serious than hiding events. So hiding removes them from being seen in the implementation, but you're still collecting them. Dropping events completely removes them. So they will still be listed in here, but it will say dropped under status. And what dropped means is there's an ingestion layer between the SDKs and you sending us data and the Mixpanel project. And if you drop an event at that layer, it says, no, we're not accepting that anymore. So you can come in here as a project owner and you can think, I'm collecting all of these events, but some of them just aren't valuable to me anymore, and I don't really want them. You don't need to go and change all the code in your app, re-release it, wait for everyone to upgrade, which, as we know, can take a while. Instead, you can just come in here and drop them, and then they don't count anymore. They don't count towards your totals, but it also means they're not shown on any of your reports. And the reason why I say dropping is more serious is because we're not accepting them. They're not there. So if you decided today that I wanted to drop an event, but then next Thursday, you decide I want to collect that event again, there will be a gap in between there where there will be no data. So that's an important thing to remember as well, but it is possible. Other things that you can do in Lexicon, you have this tab called data audit. And what a data audit is when you enable it, is it takes a snapshot of your data. And then it says, I'm going to look at all of the events and properties coming in, and I'm going to see whether they line up with what I expect. And then you can see, well, actually, in Lexicon, we have these 20, in this case, 22 events coming in, and we have certain properties, and we have all of these properties. But in my data audit, I have data that's coming in that I don't expect, or this data is not being collected, or something to do with that. And then you can clean it up, and then you can say, well, I don't need this data, or why is this coming in? And you can look through all of that. Also, what you can do is you can import and export data from your lexicon. So you can export all of the data, which would be a really good place to start if you want to build your spec, because then you basically get, this is what is coming in. And then you can make changes to that. You can update names, add descriptions, and then you can import it back in, and you can do all of that as well. So they're really important things to know when you're collecting your data. We would recommend kind of sitting down and, again, having a think about, if I'm building a framework and if I'm building my implementation spec and my plan, is it reflected in the project that I have? Is it reflected in what I'm looking at? And by using these things, by using the exporting of data, by using the data audit, you can understand whether what you already have kind of meets your goals, or whether you need to add any extra data in. You can do that too. So that's in there. And now we talk about other sources of data. Now, this is a really good one because, as I said at the beginning, Mixpanel isn't, I would say, naive enough to think that this is the only tool that you're going to use. And quite frankly, there are so many other things that you can use as well. So if you haven't seen it already, there is a Mixpanel partners page within our website where you can have a look through our integrations dictionary and take a look and see all of the tools that we work with. Now, you can change every single thing that you need to, and you can change what you want to see specifically. So we only want to take a look at attribution. And then here we have the attribution partners that we work with. So Adjust, AppsFlyer, Branch, more of them down here. Now, some of these have preferential rates because we work with them, but actually everything that you see in here, you will be able to get your data in and out of Mixpanel, either using a full integration that we have, or actually we have a number of documents in our developer library where there are custom APIs that you can use to bring in your data. So it doesn't need to be a full integration. Now, if you have AppsFlyer, if you have, and one of the questions that we had already was about moEngage, if you have that, obviously these are partners that we have and partners that we work with. So for that one there, yeah, moEngage is there as well. So they're a partner that we work with. You can bring that data in using the integrations. And some of them are quite as simple as going here, integrations, and then which one do you want to sync with, and you can add, see they're all down here, different integrations, and see how many there are. But also we have APIs and schemas to bring your data in. So things like an ingestion API, the raw data API, which will bring in your data without needing to be a full integration. Now, the difference here is that a full integration obviously means it's kind of managed and controlled by both sides, and it means that there are thorough documentation on that. But with these APIs, there are limits to the amount of data that you can bring in per minute or potentially per hour, depending on the type of API that it is. But also because it's more ad hoc, you would have to manage that yourself. So definitely something to think about. But the reality is that any single source of data that you have, you should be able to bring into Mixpanel. Another question that we got with, can I implement Mixpanel without setting up a data pipeline? Of course you can. So this is either dependent on if you want to do a client or server-side implementation, but you would need to use the Mixpanel SDK in order to send events into Mixpanel. The only reason you would need the full data pipelines integration is if the only source of data that you had was your data warehouse. So BigQuery or Snowflake or whatever, your Azure, whatever it might be. And you wanted to bring that data into Mixpanel, so you decide you want the full pipelines integration. If you do that, we can work with that with you, but there's work to be done in that, and that's in here as well. So that's definitely possible. But that's what you can do with your data. As I said, there is a huge number of partners that we work with. I would say that anything you want to bring in, either search through the integrations directory, and if you can't find something there, always write into our support team and ask if there's someone we work with, which is the potential, or you can come into the developer documentation and look through here and bring in your data yourself. You shouldn't ever need to silo your data without bringing it in, or indeed taking it out of Mixpanel, because the integrations work both ways. So you should be able to say, okay, here's the amount of the data that I'm collecting in Mixpanel. I want to use it in other places. I want to use it in a messaging tool that I have. I want to use it in SurveyMonkey. I want to use it in anything to do with that. It's all in there too. Cool. Moving on to the next part, and this is using your data. And I promise you, I am seeing the questions coming in, and Elena is adding to the Slido. We will get to them. There's only a little bit more of the presentation, and then we'll go straight into the questions. So if you have submitted them, we will be going back and answering those. So don't worry, we haven't forgotten them. They will be answered. So we've gone through what you should be tracking and what you can track. You've got your KPIs in place, your specs in place. You now want to build your reports. Now, we offer and we have a large number of help documents to kind of cover you through this. What I'm going to do is just come out of this and go into what I would recommend, which is having a single KPI dashboard for your most important metrics. So here I've got my focus metrics, I've got new feature usage, I've got my active usage, I've got retention. And this is what we would recommend. So everything that you're tracking and using should be moving towards creating something like this. Now, the great thing with Mixpanel is that everything that you're tracking can be used in reports and can be used in breakdowns and filters and everything to do with that. Another great thing is that there is no limit to the number of reports you can create and the dashboards you can create. So you shouldn't ever have to worry about, I'm going to create this dashboard and et cetera, et cetera. But in here, what I'd recommend is having a single KPI dashboard tracking your most important metrics. And maybe you think, that's like a high level dashboard and you can break everything down into smaller sub dashboards. So maybe if you think back to what the different types of metrics are, maybe we've got a different dashboard for engagement. We can do that too. But also what you want to think about is, well, what are the other reports that are going to be important to me? And if you all have Mixpanel, then you know the most important reports are going to be kind of these four on the left-hand side. So insights, flows, funnels, retention. And what the great thing is with these now is that you can go straight into the basics course for this. And also you can go and click on the example reports straight from here. So there are empty states in all reports. But also you want to think about, how am I tracking that data? How am I converting the events and the properties that I've decided are important to me into insights? And this is where we're going to be going through that. Now, one of the questions that we got was about flows, and it was to do with, if I have a number of steps within my flows report, then how does Mixpanel decide how to display that data? So just as a, as an event here, if we have a 5-step flow after a certain event, then obviously we're looking at what users are doing through this. Now, please bear with me, this is sample data, because obviously people wouldn't be completing registration more than once. That's absolutely fine. But the question was, if it takes a customer 7 steps to go between A and B, then how do we determine that when it's only 3 steps through here? And this is what we can do throughout this. So if you have defined 5 steps within your flow, and actually it takes more than that, you're only going to see the first 5 steps. You're not going to see any more than that. It's only when you reach the point that it connects the 2 events that you decide. So kind of this one here and, I don't know, start event. And only if somebody reaches that between these steps are we going to show them. If they don't reach it, we'll show the events that they do, and then we'll kind of stop after that point and won't show them. That was one question that we got. Just wanted to make sure I covered that. But just as a general throughout here, you should be able to add all of your data into the reports that you need. As I said, every report that you go into now has this, where you can learn the information here and you can see example reports. On every single page within Mixpanel, there is the help button here. And if you click on it and search Help Center, it brings up a widget in the bottom corner that is context sensitive. So I'm in funnels, it's showing me funnels help articles. If I click on one of them and then do launch like that, it launches straight into the Help Center, which will take me through this. And everything that you should need to cover your reporting is in the Help Center under analysis, and you can see all of the reports here: dashboards, insights, flows, funnels, retention, things like that. If you ever have questions on any of these, they're the same thing that we just looked at. If we do this, and then I can contact support, it will open the web form and you can go through that. And that's definitely a good thing to do. You know, our support team are incredibly responsive and they should be able to help you with that. But also, we do have the Mixpanel community, which I would recommend that you check out, which again can connect you with other Mixpanel users. And if you ask questions, we'll be able to get through and see that information. So just as a review of what we've seen so far, go back to the beginning here. The questions that we have, the big questions, are what should I track? And here we really want to think about, you know, in general terms, I want to make sure that the events that I am tracking are related to a KPI or a metric. There's a saying, can't remember exactly who it's by, but if you are tracking a metric and it goes up and it goes down, but you're not willing to do anything about it based on that, then is it really important? Also linked to that is we don't want to be tracking things like vanity metrics. You know, yes, it's important to know how many people have downloaded and installed our app, but if they're not engaged and if they're not doing anything, then do we really care? I don't know, we need to think about that. You should have all the data and information in there to track your KPIs, to measure your goals and to improve your app, your product, whatever it might be. If you've already implemented, we still recommend doing that if you haven't already, and using the tools that you've got in Lexicon with the data audit and with exporting and managing your data, you should be able to clean up what you already have. With other sources of data, you can bring in anything that you want. And any data that you bring in, and I should have mentioned this at the time, any data that you bring in will also be stored in your lexicon. So if it's from a third-party source, it will still be in there. All you need to do is to just say what it is. For example, we have customers that have brackets at the beginning of events that say adjust or apps flyer, because that's where it's coming from. And then using your data, once you've got all the sources in, the reports should all be there, and you should be able to create the reports that you need onto a dashboard that should be the one place that you can go to and say, are my metrics improving? Are they changing? I'm measuring the data through there. All based on the fact that you've got a solid implementation so that you understand the changes in your data. So it all kind of goes through the same thing. Now we're going to stop here. I'm just going to stop sharing for a second, but I will be back. And I'm just going to move into the Q&A portion through that. And we are going to present, and then I'm going to share my screen again. Great. So if you, as I said, if you haven't already, you can go into the Slido and you can see the questions that have already been submitted. You can upvote them and they'll go to the top, and you can take a look at other things as well. So the first question we have is how to deal with identity management and what are best practices for identifying users. This is a really good question. And ID management is, you know, not something to be taken lightly. It's definitely something to think about and to completely understand what's going on through that. And what I would say is the best practice would be think about when is the first time that you act that you really need to know who your user is. Now, you may have a product or you may have an app that once it's done, once people open the app, they're logged in straight away. You know, think about banking, if you think about anything to do with that, you have to know who the people are before they can do anything. So in that instance, identity management is relatively simple because you're going to be identifying the user straight away. Now, you may have an app where people can browse. So something like, you know, e-commerce, people can browse before they log in. I know there's plenty of apps and products that I use that do that. So what we would recommend we would do there is you identify the user, but you're also aliasing to the user once you understand who they are. So once you're asking them to log in, you can then alias that data back, and all of the previous data that you've collected about them would then be added into the profile. Now, the great thing is that even if you have an anonymous session, everything will be assigned to a distinct ID that we looked at the beginning. And then after that, you will also be able to, as long as it's stored in the browser cookie or the mobile cookie, which most of the time they are, even if a user doesn't log in the first time or the second time, and then they come back and then you find out who they are, all of that anonymous data will be added into the user profile. So that's what we would recommend, and that's what we would go with that. Great. Yeah, I was going to say, Elena, would you be able to just get rid of the questions once they've been answered? But that's great. So Omar, we've been using Firebase for a while and want to switch to Mixpanel. Can we reuse the same events and previous information? Yes, the answer is yes, you can. Now, there's a number of things that you can do. The first thing would be is if you already have a Firebase implementation, then you may already have some sort of data spec, data source, or it may be stored on a third-party thing. Or you just maybe want to plug in what you've already got in Firebase and go through there. Now, this would go back to the developer documentation that I spoke about before. There is information in there that will give you, this is how you can plug your Firebase data into Mixpanel. Some customers have both running at the same time and they want them to kind of reflect the same thing, so you can do that. But if it's a matter of switching off from Firebase and switching on to Mixpanel, then there will be a way to kind of categorize the data that you have and then just switching over to sending the data into Mixpanel. All you need to do to make sure you're sending the data into Mixpanel is obviously you need to update the tracking code, which should be relatively simple, but each project has the project key that you just need to put at the top of the tracking code and then it sends in. So that's something that you can do. And as I said, it depends exactly what you're doing, whether you're switching one off and moving to Mixpanel or whether you want to run both side by side. But within the developer documentation, you will be able to see all of that data and information. Is it possible to see profile change history log? Also property causes changes in profile. I'm not sure exactly what this question refers to. So is it possible to see the profile change history log? The answer is no. So you'd be able to, once the profile information has been updated, it reflects that recent state. It obviously is collected within the event properties if you're tracking both at the same time. So you don't have to collect just event or just profile properties. They can be the same thing. So the profile property could be about the device or about the location or about the account type for a user, and it's also stored as a profile property at the same time or a user property at the same time, so you can do that. So that's where you can say that. And which properties cause changes in profiles? Now, these are the user properties. The user properties would be updated every time if they're being set. The events and event properties are immutable. So once they've been set, they do not change, whereas the user properties are ones that can change should they need to. How to track attribution? Oh, okay. Can I bulk drop all of my events that haven't fired in the past month? Yes. So one of the things I didn't point out when we were looking at lexicon, but I will go back to it, is on the right-hand side here, you have volume, and volume is the volume of events that you're collecting in the last 30 days. So you could just simply sort this column, and anything that has a 0 next to it, you can just select down here and then do drop, and you can bulk drop that. So yes, that's entirely possible in there. Great. How to track attribution in Mixpanel? This is a good question. So we track some attribution by default. If you search default properties in our help center, you have UTM properties in there. There is some attribution that we can't do. So if a user is taken from like a social media app and then they go into the App Store and then they download in the App Store, and this is specific for things like iOS, Mixpanel does not capture and cannot capture that data because, quite frankly, Apple doesn't share the data with us and there's nothing we can do about it. So that's where you may want to use an attribution partner such as Branch or AppsFlyer or Adjust to get all of that information in. So there are things that we can do, but not all of them are captured as default. But things like UTM properties, so things someone comes from web and you're collecting the UTM source medium, whatever it might be, in the browser and stored in the browser cookie, then yes, that information would come through to us. But there is some things that we can't do. How many events is too much? I think, what's happened there? We've gone to another question. Attributions come back. But there was an event that there was a question there, which was how many events are too much? And the answer to that is, you need to track all of the events that you need to measure your metrics. That's really what you need to do. If you have all of your metrics covered by all of your events, then that should be enough. But obviously, again, that will be based also on the plan that you have and the number of events that you need to track. But I would say if it covers all of your metrics with kind of 20 events, then that's all you need. But again, I work with customers who have hundreds of events because they're tracking hundreds of different things. So that's absolutely fine. Should opening a page in a new tab be tracked in the same session? Yes, it should be, which again, sessions in Mixpanel are defined as usually on time. So it's usually half an hour without a user triggering any new events. You can change it to be event-based, but the session by default is 30 minutes. So if a user is only triggering certain events and they're continuing to trigger them even in a new tab, it's still being stored in the cookie. So we'd still collect that against the same user. And if it's within the same session, then yes. Great. Oh, I don't know what's going on here. Okay, cool. I can tick these off. Sorry. We've done that one. As a SaaS company with multiple company environments, what is the best way to filter between companies? So there's a couple of things here. Firstly, there is a Mixpanel tool called Group Analytics, which you may want to have a look at, but you don't need to use, which effectively lets you analyze users based on users and based on the kind of company types that they're in. So you can do that as well. But also what you can do is you can, I would say, add in all of the different events into one single project and then filter them based on kind of a naming convention at the front. Another thing that I can point out here is that when you're highlighting events, you can add a tag and you can just create a tag that's, I don't know, it's just called this test and then create and then save. And then what that does is it adds a tag to these events. So now I can collect my events together. So for your example there, you could have things like the company name could be stored here. So then what happens is when we go into my reports, at the top of the list of events is now, oh, it's not loaded properly yet, but hopefully it will. Cool. Is now these events that I've tagged. So you could tag each kind of company environment as a certain thing, and then they all appear at the top. They also appear in this drop-down list, but they'd also appear at the top here. The other thing could be is that you can just have them in different projects. That's entirely possible as well. Cool. Just hang on a second. It's coming in the chat. Okay. Oh, Jazz, you're here too. Thank you. Great. Next question is Mixpanel the only tool required for mobile app marketing and analytics? Yeah, so do we need other tools? So I would say that lots of other tools, as we looked at already with the integrations directory, we cover pretty much everything. I would also say that we're not competing with Google Analytics. We use Google Analytics for our marketing purposes. They are incredibly good at what they do. They're Google. They wouldn't exist if they weren't incredibly good at what they do. So use the tools that you need. Mixpanel is incredibly valuable as a user analytics tool for understanding what your users are doing and how they're interacting with your product. We already mentioned that if you need additional attribution data, things like branch and AppsFlyer are really useful. And you may find that there's Google Analytics data that you want to track too, but it's a very different purposes. So I would say if you want to do mobile app marketing and analytics, Mixpanel is great for user analytics. So what are people doing after they've interacted with my ads and things like that? But Google Analytics is going to be great for tracking your ad performance, and branch and AppsFlyer for attribution. So you can use all of them or whatever fits in there. Is there a limit on the number of events or properties that can be integrated into Mixpanel? No limit on events. Properties, the number of properties that can be sent with each individual event is 255. If you need more than that, then I believe that there's also something we could do should we need to, but that's the limit. So number of events, limit, no. Send in as many as you need to. We've already touched on that. Properties 255 per event is the limit on that. Is the name, I have named different events with the same name. Can I use a few events with the same name? So I have the different events with the same name. So yes, so there's a couple of things that you can do. So first of all, we wouldn't recommend having different events with the same name. Now, one way to fix that would be another option within the lexicon is that you, and again, it's something that I can't see in this project, but you will be able to see it in your own as an owner, is if you select multiple events, an option comes up here to merge them, which means that they appear as one thing. Which is possible. And then the second part with that is, can I use few events on the same stage of a funnel? So again, yes, you can. What you can do within a funnel is, and with all of our reports as well, is you can add here and you can create a custom event, and then you can add different events in here, and then they can be named one single thing, and then they will appear as the same event in a stage of the funnel. Now, if they have the same name and you need to split them out, then that would be something that you'd need to do within the implementation, because obviously if they're tracking different things, but they're called the same thing, then you can have them as different steps in the funnel, but it's definitely something that we would recommend kind of fixing at the implementation level. Can Mixpanel track only if users give consent? Yeah, this is kind of a question for your legal departments, as it were. But yes, is the short answer. Obviously everything should be prompted with a "we are using your data for to improve your performance. Is that okay?" And it should be included in your terms and conditions and things like that. But the short answer to that is yes. If you need more information, there is legal documentation in our help center that will give you an outline of that. Can we track in-depth subscription data monthly? Yes, so this would all be done by properties. So you can have events that are coming through, and then the properties attached to that could define where people are in the stage. If there are no defined events that are being fired, you can do a thing that's kind of called a heartbeat event. So that kind of updates and it kind of sends through, and it brings the most recent state for your user through. So they're not actually doing anything, but it's still bringing the data back into your product, so you can do that. But yes, this would be entirely possible with the properties that you're collecting. So user did event, and they are, the free trial has started, then they move to a paid subscription. Did they continue their subscription? It would be done with the events and the properties that you're collecting and the properties associated to that user as well. Can you extend help support to a non-techie entrepreneur to set up this panel? Yeah, so I think the answer to that is we haven't, obviously the resources that we have and the developer documents are relatively tech heavy, but that's where I talked about the Mixpanel community before. There are a number of people in there who'll be able to help you, and you always have our support engineering team who are really, really valuable. So that's what I'd recommend doing through that. And through the community as well, it's not just other Mixpanel customers who are in there, it's also our developers, our support team, people like me doing my job. I'm on the community as well and answering people's questions. So the answer to that is yes, there should be any resources that you need within that. If you need something more than that, as kind of something beyond that, then that's probably something that we would need to discuss as needed basis, but everything should be in there too. We have a website and app that don't have the exact same functionality as Supercube. The answer to that is it's entirely your choice. So you could create 2 separate projects and track them separately, or you can collect one project, and as I said before, with the other events, just tag them through the different things to do with that, and just say this is coming through web, this is coming through the app. But it's entirely up to you. If the functionality is so different, then yeah, that would be through that. Is it user properties 255 per user? No, that's just per each event coming through. So if you want to do more, then yeah, that's entirely up to you. It's just per each event coming through, it's 255 properties. So if you want to add lots of different properties to each different event, and then it builds up to more than 255 per user, then yes, it can do that. Cool. How can I make my own implementation for iOS or Android? Yeah, this would be going through our developer docs. You can find them there. There are pages, individual pages for iOS and Android, and through that, I can see another one popping up. What is the key differences between Mixpanel and Amplitude? Oh God, I'll answer this one now. Main differences between Mixpanel and Amplitude are that ultimately we do a lot of things the same. I would say that the Mixpanel's been around for longer. We have a stronger engineering team. We have an incredibly in-depth kind of services team, Mixpanel support team that have won awards. The products themselves are going to do a lot of similar things, but it's more to do with what you want to achieve and who you want to go with. That's ultimately the thing there. How do you track multiple devices for the same user? Yeah, so multiple devices for the same user would be done on the distinct ID. So when the alias is done, it would be through that. And then multiple users for the same device, again, is more difficult, but if people are logging in differently, then that is something that is possible, but if people are all using the same account, like for example, people sharing Netflix accounts, we're not going to be able to know unless you have some sort of divider there that says, you know, this is one user, this is a different one. But it would be done based on the identifier when you find out who that user is, and the device ID and device tokens and things like that. But that's entirely possible. Again, look at the Mixpanel identifying and aliasing data, and it should all be in there. The Mixpanel events are a little messy. Hopefully we've already covered this one with what you're able to do, and it's hard to trust the data, so how you can clean that up. I'm just going to have a quick check on the Q&A. So the questions in here, we've already used Mixpanel on paid account for users, and they come through as undefined. Yeah, so I'm going to, so for both of these questions, we use a tool called MaxMind for location data. If that's incorrect, then it's definitely something to submit to our support team for location information. And yeah, again, there's another one there for the country code region showing up as undefined. Yes, that would definitely be something to send through to our team. Now, there are places where MaxMind is less effective, but it would just need to go through to our team there. So yeah, we've gone through those there. Okay, cool. Should uninstalls be tracked as events on a user profile or both? Both, if possible. Obviously, an uninstall event is very tough because unless you know exactly when people are uninstalling, it's a very difficult thing to track. But we definitely recommend kind of doing that if you can. And sometimes it's just not possible. So you just have to think about, it's a dormant user, they're not involved anymore, and that's maybe not what I can do. But if it's something that you can collect, then I would say do as many as you can. Best practices, we've been through that already, hopefully. Best practice for creating good user profiles. Again, hopefully we've been through that as well. Can a non-techie implement Mixpanel for an app? Yes, absolutely. Using our guides, there's a lot of copy and paste stuff. Ultimately, you know, when you're creating tracking code, there's always things like mixpanel.track. And then if you think about it, it's then mixpanel.track and the name of your event and the name of the properties that you're bringing through. Ultimately, if you've built your spec document, you really should be able to kind of create that yourself. So it should be something that could just be really easy to do, and then you just copy the code into, you know, headers for web pages or into the app code, and it should be very easy to do in that. Two-sided marketplace. How do you have the metrics of both sides of the marketplace? I mean, that's a big question. I would say having two separate frameworks for two different sides would be my recommendation, especially if the products are, you know, slightly different for different sides of the marketplace. That's what I would recommend. Two different frameworks, one for each side of the marketplace, and then linking them together where you can, but also understanding that the key metric and the key KPI for different sides are going to be different. So obviously you want people moving towards the focus metric for both, but it's important to remember that you can have different metrics for each one. What else have we got in chat? Yeah, rotation course, great. Engineers to easily delete events. The Mixpanel admin set to drop. Yeah, the developers would need to kind of do this one by one. If it's been set to dropped, you kind of don't need to worry about it. That's one of the good things. But yeah, they need to go and do it one by one. But also remember, you can export the data from Lexicon, so it will tag that these events have been dropped. So then you could easily see these are the ones that have been dropped, send it off to the engineers and get done. That's to do with that. Can you help with naming conventions? Yes, we can. Again, it's more based on whatever your format is. We just recommend naming things whatever is most useful. Again, in Lexicon, you can change the name in the display. So name the events, the technical things based on what they're doing and the actions on that, but then you can change them in Lexicon. So you don't have to have your naming conventions decided on day one and then they can never change. So track the events that you need to. If it has to be more technical, that's absolutely fine. But then the naming conventions can then come through and you can change them in your Lexicon. And also they can change anytime you want. You don't have to, again, change them once. I just answered that one, so that's to do with MaxMind and the data there. Probably submit to our support team. Additional resources to learn. Yes, there are. So I think Elena will be sending the documents through, but a lot of them are going to be linked in this presentation, so that's absolutely fine. That's through there. Can I find out if and how extensive people in my team are using Mixpanel? The short answer is yes. So within your project, you will be able to go into settings and then go into project settings. And then you have a Mixpanel usage tab, and it will show you the number of people looking at your project in the last 12 weeks. It will show you the number of queries that people are doing. So there you go, that's me doing a lot of the work there. And it will also show you the popular reports and dashboards through there as well. So that's entirely possible within that. So that's settings, project settings, Mixpanel usage on that one. And the last one, does dropping events stop the event firing and theoretically improving speed? No, it doesn't. It only stops the event from coming into Mixpanel. So it's still being fired. It's just not being captured by Mixpanel. So those are all the questions that we had. One thing to point out now, with a few minutes left, yeah, Elena's just put it in. If you could please take a minute to go to the survey that has been linked into chat and fill out the quick survey. It's really valuable to us. We want this to be the first in a running, group of these presentations in order to say, what is the most important thing to you? Do we need to dive in into more detail? That will be really valuable to us. So, things that you liked about today, things that you didn't, things that you need more information about. When we run the subsequent sessions after this, maybe we want to dive in more detail on more technical things, and we can do that too. So that will be based on that. So any feedback you can give would be really valuable. And Sarah, we will give you access to, in the follow-up email in the next kind of hour. So I think that's all the questions that we had. If there are any more questions in chat or any more in the Q&A that I didn't get to, I appreciate that I was speaking incredibly fast at the end there. So if anything was missed, then please raise your hand in the chat and let us know. But as I said, this information will be sent through to you. Just a couple of final things here is that, as we already mentioned, these things will be sent through. There is a link to the implementation course. There's a link to the 3-step evaluation, and the implementation documentation is all through there. As we already mentioned, this will already be sent through to you. And additionally, we've touched on a lot of it, but a lot of the stuff is covered in these resources here. So you have the Help Center, you have the developer documentations, you have things like Resources Hub, so exactly what we just mentioned there in terms of ebooks and blogs and articles and white papers that we've got. The Signal, which is our blog, so thought leadership, more pages in there. The community that I've mentioned a few times, great to take a look at that. And additional resources, so the partner pages, the engineering team, the customer stories and case studies in there as well. We hope that everything that you need will be available here. If it's not, please reach out to either our support team, go onto the community. As I said, we will go onto that as well, and we use that a lot. And we're always here to help you. There will always be somebody willing to answer an email and go through all of that. Just checking chat for the last time. Yeah, we will be sharing this very shortly, but I hope that this has been valuable for those of you who have been here today. I hope I was able to answer your questions. I hope you maybe have more questions off the back of this and you want to attend sessions later, but that's all from me. I've taken your full hour, and hope this has been useful, and good luck and speak soon. Thanks, guys.